Hello, everyone, and welcome to Whose Freedoms? New Expressions of Tension and Pleasure. Now, it's perhaps a little bit odd to talk about tension and pleasure. After all, the UN Special Rapporteur for Cultural Rights, Karima Benoon, stated that the COVID-19 pandemic has been cataclysmic for cultural rights, a foundational challenge to all human rights, with devastating impacts throughout the world on all spheres of life, including cultural life, with disproportionate impact on women and marginalized communities, old persons, LGBT, disabled, orang asli, and others. And yet, as we will see, there are new expressions that have flourished, whether or not we see that in relation to sort of Foucaultian resistance about power, but tension and pleasure are short-term, are kind of shorthand for terms of power. But whose power and whose freedom? Freedom of expression is also referred to as a Western value sometimes, where it's placed within sort of the Asian focus on family and community, and the Western focus on individual. And at home, this is like ini bukan kebudayaan kita. A national narrative of what budaya kita is becomes much more, can be broken up into whether or not it's just around national language, or in what way can it reflect the last known sort of 137 languages that are spoken in Malaysia, as in every day. So for the purposes of our discussion, we're going to see freedom of expression understood as fundamentally from a human rights perspective. But this can also be usefully seen in terms of three paradigms. At least that's what a research group called the Foo Fighters, instead of FOO, Foo Fighters, FOE, from Reformatsi, the independent coalition of artists and arts practitioners. So these three paradigms basically are literary, legal, and religious. So they are pluralistic and unstable, even though they may be typically seen as curtailed or otherwise rejected, unless tied to a dominant narrative. So literary, for example, would be freedom of expression in the arts, in music, literature, dance, theater, and art. And we may think of a Fahmi Reza, whose work has been censored by the state, bodies and organizations, as and when, even though in the face of a new satirical work every single day. But there's also licenses to perform which are denied or delayed until the last moment, artworks taken down, textbook histories rewritten. This is also kind of can be called literary because it sees freedom of expression in direct relation to state censorship, or at least, which we can say is a struggle over meaning. And satire, which we can say is mocking of authority through play. And there's, in terms of the legal paradigm of freedom of expression, of course, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, particularly Article 19, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So now the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia Act specifically states that there is regard shall be had to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the extent that it is not inconsistent with the federal constitution. Malaysia's legal framework, of course, for freedom of expression, we can say sees civil or common law with the constitution as the supreme law of the federation. Article 10 is the one that refers to freedom of speech, assembly and association, Sharia law, and customary law, adat perpatih, and other, whether we're talking about Mahkamah Anak Negeri and different native courts. And we have a raft of at least 10 laws, including, famously the Sedition Act 1948 and Communications and Multimedia Act 1998, which seem to be the tools of the moment. And finally, the paradigm of religious traditions. Malaysia has a Muslim majority population. Malaysians are citizens of a country in which Islam is the religion of the federation, with certain differences for those from Sabah and Sarawak. And in relation to Islam, we can refer to particular seminal texts such as Hashim Kamali's freedom of expression in Islam. But of course, there are many other religions practiced in Malaysia. And finally, yes, freedom of expression from a human rights perspective, but in terms of practices and lived experience. So curtailing freedom of expression is also abuse of power, especially in the context of dominance of a certain ethnicity, male, heteronormative, middle class, and occurs in everyday life, in institutions such as by a lecturer of a student, by teacher of student, by doctor of patient, employer, employee, director, and performer. So we'll hear what might be called counter narratives, stories that have an impact on social settings other than those perceived to be the dominant and powerful master narratives from our speakers, which I'm really happy to be able to introduce to you tonight. They are a group of academics, practitioners, activists, and artists. In fact, a fair combination of all of those. And we'll start with the first three. We'll start with Dr. Muhammad Faisal Musa, also the novelist Faisal Tehrani. He is a research fellow at the Institute of the Malay World and Civilization. Hi, Faisal. Thanks for being here. Now, 7 of his literary works were banned by the Home Ministry during the Najib Razak administration. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Helen Ting from the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, where she is associate professor. Hi, Dr. Helen. And we'll go to Adli Zakwan, who is one of the vice presidents of ABIM, the Muslim Youth Movement of Malaysia. He's currently the campaign lead for Change.org Malaysia. So there's lots to say about these 3. And then we'll join Joe and Jason Wee a little bit later on. But the first, so how we'll go is we'll have in 2 parts. The historical and contemporary will be covered in both parts, but this is in the aim of trying to get more of a conversation than a kind of interview. So anyone who's watching, please ask your questions in the chat box. Each speaker will have about 5 minutes. So, please jump in as you will, panelists. I'll bring up questions from viewers and there'll be 1-minute reminders for speakers. So here we go for the next hour and 30 minutes or so. If we could start with you, Faisal.
All right. It is important to note here that human rights are not Western. There were similar concepts in traditional Malay society. But let's look first at modern human rights. There are 4 basic principles: dignity, liberty, equality, fraternity. The personal liberties, Articles 3 to 11, the rights of the individual in relation to others and to various groups, Articles 12 through 17, the spiritual, public, and political liberties, Article 18 through 21, and the economic, social, and cultural rights, Article 22 through 27. Now, if we observe several classical Malay works, such as Tajus Salatin, an early 17th century text by Buhari al-Jauhari, we find the consistent theme of adil, or justice, and we find this consistent theme also within many other classical texts. So if we assert that the UDHR that rests upon principles such as justice is from the West, are we prepared to make the absurd claim that the Malays, or for that matter, any Asian society, have no notion of justice? Because in your openings, Dr. Ann Lee have mentioned about this notion that cultural relativism and that human rights are Western, therefore is contradict with Asian values. Now, there are so many examples from oral literature, Malay oral literature, especially the pantun on human rights or Malay deliberation on democracy. For instance, this pantun, adat Melayu adil menimbang, tidak memilih, memilah-milah. Sifat Melayu tahu menenggang, sama kasih, senang dan susah. The Malay custom judges fairly, choosing not to disunite. Malay trait contemplates wisely, both in difficulty and in delight. Now, let us look at freedom of expression. How do you look at it in Malay context? Yeah. So freedom of expression is kebebasan menyatakan. It's not just kebebasan bersuara, but kebebasan menyatakan. So there's so many pantuns in this regard. Yeah. For example, ia dapat dilihat dalam banyak pantun. Buah sentul masak di hutan, sayang setongkol di celah dahan. Tuan pukul dengan rotan, saya nak pukul dengan cakapan. Yeah, so I'm going to smash you with my words. Yeah, turun ke hilir, petik memayung, buat sayur pagi hari, jangan disindir, jangan disayung, cakapan terang supaya herti. Means that let's be transparent, let's be clear, in order for each of us, all of us, do understand and get a clear message when we debate or argue or in discussions. Pokok ribut jabu berjabu, jatuh di badan habis berdebu, cakapan kias bagai sembilu, pedihnya potong sampai empedu. Meaning that although that is the words are perhaps very harsh of the criticism, but still it is important. In Malay society says cakapan kias bagai sembilu, pedihnya potong sampai empedu. It means still we need to say it, we need to listen, we need to discuss in transparent approach. Sifat jantan gagah berani, bersikap tegas, muka belakang, adat berjalan bertuah negeri, bercakap bebas, tiada mengekang. This is important. Adat berjalan bertuah negeri, bercakap bebas, tiada mengekang means that custom, when we apply this customary law, bertuah negeri. So we're going to get a blessed society, blessed country. Bercakap bebas, tiada mengekang means that we can just say freely, we can say things freely, and tiada mengekang. Now, what are the rights of an artist in this order, satirist in this context? Yeah, for sure we are allowed to criticize because arts contribute to the society. Now, if we look at Farida Shahid reports, previously Dr. Andy mentioned about Karima Ben Noon, Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights. Way before Karima Ben Noon on the position, there's Farida Shahid. So she's also a Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights during 2013. So she made it clear that artists may entertain people, but they also contribute to social debates, sometimes bringing counter discourses and potential counterweights to existing power centers. The vitality of artistic creativity is necessary for the development of vibrant cultures and the functioning of democratic societies. So now, with this spirit, me as a creator of Fatah Farah, yeah, for example, and many other works, presented human rights issues in our webcomics and novel graphics. So as emphasized by Farida Shahida, decision makers, including judges, when resorting to possible limitations to artistic freedoms, should take into consideration the nature of artistic creativity as opposed to its value or merit, as well as the right of artists to dissent, to use political, religious, and economic symbols as a counter discourse to dominant powers, and to express their own belief and world vision. The use of the imaginary and fiction must be understood and respected as a crucial element of the freedom indispensable for creative activities. Now, Fatah and Farah, produced by Project Dialogue, explore these interesting subjects on human rights. Yeah, so we have discourses on identity, racism, cultural debate, LGBT, free from corruption is human rights, free and fair election, gender issues, child rights, poverty, hate speech, and the rights of disabilities. So do follow us on social medias, IG, Twitter, Facebook, under Fatah and Farah. So I think within 5 minutes, I tried to summarize everything. I mean, from my point of view on freedom of expression, or what I translate or I interpret it in BM in Malay as kebebasan menyatakan, because it's important for us to translate it correctly, or else it will be manipulated by the others. Yeah, back to you, Anne.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Faisal. I'm just going to cut to go straight to Helen now, who Dr. Helen, who will talk about the well, something around the tension between the objective and subjective dimensions in knowledge construction, with specific reference to some an example. I think, just as Faisal did, the idea is, that each person would speak from, there's perspective around freedom of expression, and then give us an example, a concrete example that we can think about that's something new. So thanks, Faisal, for telling us about Fatah and Farah, the web comic. Over to you, Dr. Helen.
Hi, thank you, Anne. I was trying to think what is the relevance of freedom of expression in my work. So I thought of this, sharing this perspective about knowledge construction. I think I used to be in natural science. You know that in natural science, if it's maths, you can get 100 marks, because if it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. So I used to enjoy that, you get the top mark. But when I get into the social science stream, I begin to realize that the social reality is not the same as the so-called natural science. You need to really learn to look at reality from different perspectives, and you realize that there are multiple perspectives. To begin with, when we try to construct social knowledge, there are two challenges, let's say. One is, let's say you try to establish why someone did what he or she did. Maybe you think this is easy, but you just follow one or two court cases, you will realize how difficult it is to establish whether someone committed corruption, how many witnesses they need to call, and how, the defense could sort of argue their case too. So in a way, when, as a social scientist, when you really try to reconstruct what really happened, it's not as easy as we think. When we read a book, we take it for granted, oh, this is what happened. But then, you may encounter another academic who present a different, the same, let's say the same person or same incident from a totally different point of view. So here, first is the objective aspect of what really happened, empirical truth. But the other one is what we call interpretation. Interpretation, let's say, the motive or the meaning of why certain people did whatever. So here, for instance, I want to link it with my work, since I work with, analyzing history textbooks. Let's say World War II. The version of history textbook on World War II that I analyzed in National History textbook, I realized that is too much towards what is more Malay-dominated perspective of World War II. And I in one of the research, I try to compare it with the so-called Chinese independent schools history textbooks. And I realized that there are some quite interesting differences. I think it is not just because of objective facts, it is also because of social positionality of the people, because the Japanese treated the different communities in a different way. So they came up with, from the experience, with a very different way of looking at this episode of the history in our country, how who these Japanese, what they did, and so forth. Yeah, so what I mean is sometimes the subjectivity can come from social positionality, because then you say, oh, my parents' historical memory seems to be very different from, let's say, the history textbooks. So why is it so? So then perhaps you may begin to try to look for different facets of the same historical reality. So here, there is a tension between objective and subjective sometimes, because, you know, you say, oh, the Japanese, they were bad people, or the Japanese, they were good people because they tried to, you know, during that time, actually, for the Indian communities, the Japanese actually supported them to form the so-called the Indian army to liberate India. So the Japanese were seen as liberator, helping with liberation of India, for instance. But at the same time, they were treating the Chinese very cruelly. Whereas for the Malays, they tried to recruit them to help them with the military, you know, regime. So in that sense, actually, you see that in order to reconstruct this part of history, you need to actually get higher up to see the overall and try to also see the contradiction among the differences. So here actually, yeah. So but if you look at other parts of history, historical narrative, especially national history, I think we have a lot of controversies over that. And recently there was a debate, yeah, between, you know, Ranjit Singh and another person on this. I think very often, even in our WhatsApp group, when we debate on this type of issues, we get very upset, very tense, you know. And I remember once I had an argument with someone, and the third person told us, he said, both of you are saying very important things to you, to each one of you. You know, he even though, you know, we disagree with each other, and there actually, I think the important thing is to be able to listen to the other side also. And so here, perhaps sometimes we say, you know, academics, we can speak the truth to power. We can challenge the so-called the official narrative. But mind you, we also have diversity of views among academics. So there you go. There is, you know, how do we sort of navigate this diversity of views? Here, I think, yeah, besides the importance of respect for freedom of expression of others, I think it is the tension between objective and subjective coming again, which means that sometimes, you know, with increased knowledge of empirical evidence, perhaps we could come to a certain common ground. You know, we can come to a certain agreement that these things happen, but perhaps, yeah, we differ in our interpretation in terms of the emphasis of how we see things. But sometimes, yeah, I'm finished. So, but sometimes, so it is not enough just to allow for different perspective to exist. I think there, to bridge that, we need empathy. We need people who are willing to also understand the other side of the story. And in terms of nation building, and to construct a collective historical story about, you know, the origin of where we come from, how we construct this nation. There, I think expression, just respecting for others, respect for others' freedom of expression is not enough. You need, in addition, empathy, and also, you know, the ability to communicate and to dialogue there. But lastly, I want to say that I think our academic training for students is important, that, you know, we try to make students aware of this possibility of plurality of interpretation, but grounded in evidence, empirical evidence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Perhaps we could, later sort of talk about how, if there is actually a kind of, example where that history has been written, which is able to sort of, any kind of textbook that has been able to combine different viewpoints within the same sort of textbook, because it seems like that would be a perfect opportunity, but it's very, very, very difficult to get everybody's opinion in. Okay, if we can go to Adli now, and if you could tell us, Adli, maybe a little bit about sort of new interfaith dialogues or traditions also of freedom of expression that you use in your work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anli, and others. Thank you for the invite. I'm honored to be among the great speakers that we have here, and I'll just share my views. So yeah, talking about tradition, it's interesting because talking to you earlier about where it's our direction. I mean, I read Prof. Hashim Kamali on his book of freedom of expression, but leads me to this book of Makalatul Fil Al-Hurriyat, written by Sheikh Dr. Ahmad Raisuni, a Moroccan jurist on this, and he actually goes back to the origin of the creation of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, and the first human being, the father of mankind, to basically justifies that freedom of expression is not just a fundamental rights, but it also comes with transcendental duties on human being, right? So if I may share about a bit of stories about the creation of Adam, there's three basically short part of it, where the first one, when Allah announced that he created a man, which is Adam, to be Khalifa to fil ard, and the vicegerent of earth. Then at that time, the angel actually responded by saying, why you created him? I mean, when he will only cause destruction, he will only cause bloodshed and everything. But Allah responded by saying that, I know what you don't know. So even in the first instance, the creation of Allah, which is angel, which is known to be the only most obedient creation of all, allowed to question God, or to ask this question to God about the creation. We basically shows even before the creation of Adam at that time, there is this value, I mean, God in this perspective, there's a value of expression. And then, of course, then we go to the second part of the conversation, which is recorded in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Surah Al-A'raf, when the conversation with the devil, Iblis basically questioned, why do I need to subject or to him when he was actually created by soil, by earth, I'm created by by lights, or by fire. So I should be better, I should be the vicegerent. But then again, during this process, God have actually increased the martabat, or the situation, or the position of mankind. In his word, walaqad karamna bani Adam, God has actually increased the martabat of the creation of Adam by giving him the knowledge, by giving him the ability to name things and explain things. And this is basically, according to Sheikh Dr. Ahmad Raisuni, is the fundamental evidence to show that Islam and according to custom and history and everything, allows and much more celebrate the ability of mankind to express their views. And not just that, it's also a sign of the ability of the dignity of human being, which means that the freedom of expression is intertwined, it comes together with the dignity of human being. If you oppress a person for expressing his views, he has basically go against the dignity of human being. And Prof. Hashim Kamali again written the objective of this. Why then God has narrated all these stories, the creation of Adam, is basically two main objectives of freedom of expression. The first one is, of course, discovery of truth, and the second, again, the word of upholding human dignity, which shows again that freedom of expression is closely intertwined with dignity. But of course, as for any rights and freedom, there is a limit. And this is where I guess the problem starts. I mean, and the limits or restriction is not something new. Even in the same stories of the creation of Adam, God has clearly says that you can live free in heaven, but do not eat the forbidden fruit, buah khuldi. But then, of course, we know what happened after that, which shows then not just the freedom of expression, but freedom of choice. I mean, when Prophet Adam has this choice of given the choice of whether should you if you want to live in heaven, or if you choose not to transgress the limitation that was set. But what the problem that we are facing here in Malaysia is, of course, what is the forbidden fruit for us? So who determines it? I mean, to what extent? So this is where the problem starts. And of course, there's always this long debate and criticism, a stream of criticism of the government handling of managing freedom of expression. To some extent, it also conflicted with the process. Some say that this is a process or the damage of Islamization, which also deserve a layer of criticism. Because why? Because the way how we see it, I mean, what we are going through right now is not just an increase of control of an institution, but it's also a control of a government that use or misuse or even abuse Islam as a kind of excuse in limiting space of expression. In all kind of written and unwritten laws, even you can see force many Malaysians to living in fear. There's the unwritten rule saying that these are the things that you cannot say. I mean, there's a lot now, even though with social media have expanded the space, but the fear is still there. I mean, I myself sometimes before I tweeted, I deleted quite a number of many tweets, fearing that this will actually cause distraction. Indeed, because the freedom of expression does not, it's not, like I said, full freedom, in the sense that there's always this limitation. You can't create false news. You can't actually cause hatred and others. There's definitely some limitation. But again, the problem that we're facing now is that space is keep shrinking and shrinking. So where ABIM comes in. So as ABIM, as Islamic organization, youth organization, what we're trying to do is we see the importance of creating a safe space, widening the parameters of agreement and disagreement. Because what we are saying now, the world is getting too polarized. If you're ABIM, you'll be called as Islamist. But at the same time, sometimes when ABIM with their friends of Muslims group, they will see us as a group of liberal and plurals. But when we go to the other side, they will see us as Islamist, convention, conservative and others. Because the world has becoming too black and white. So what we're trying to do now is making sure that people see the colors of Malaysia. I mean, the diversity of opinion and views. And hence why we're trying to do now, we have, together with several other NGOs, have created this Project Bangsa Malaysia. And Project Bangsa Malaysia is not just a statement, but rather it's a vehicle of empowerment for the people to take charge and to flood the arena of political democracy by saying that we are not entering political party, but rather make full use of the political sphere of space that we have, and to have a safe space to discuss about things that deemed to be sensitive. And only, I don't know, who knows what are sensitive. But now what we're trying to do is to creating more space of that. Through this project, we have met so many groups, Orang Asal, the Chinese, Indian, the Borneo, Sabah and Sarawak, the group of students. We are trying to meet as much as possible, making sure that it is culture of expression. I mean, there's a space for us to have a discourse, and during this space, we have openly said that we don't have to agree, because sometimes we put too high a standard, saying that we have to agree on everything, but it's actually not, and it's actually impossible. What we're trying to do now is to identify things that we disagree and move on things that we agree on, which is of course the idea of Bangsa Malaysia. And why Bangsa Malaysia has failed before, because it has been putting too much focus on the political will to do it, but rather the most effective way how to do it, the way how we see it, is to coming from bottom up. The people has to raise up, the people have to take charge of this sphere and making sure that we make known of our position on things. And what we want is actually a widening space of political of this freedom of expression. So I guess in 5 minutes, I guess that is the only thing I can share, and of course look forward for questions later.
Great, thank you, Adli. That sets off a lot of questions, I think, to find out in more detail about what the project is about. Now we sort of go into general Q&A, and there's a good question here from Siti Aisha, which is for you, Faisal. Just to read it out, it says, Sastra can and always will be used as a tool to express an opinion or criticize something. So how can we know whether the pantun that you have read to us just now, or any other old Malay literature, is a reflection of the adat practiced in the community, or a rejection/criticism as to how the society is run?
Yeah, that's a good question. But what we ought to know is that within Malay literature, there's classical Malay literature. So there's oral literature and what we call court literature. Yeah. So court literature such as Sejarah Melayu, Hikayat Hang Tua, we can't really see these human rights values because of there's feudalism there. There's a lot of things there. Yeah. Although that Hassan Ahmad, one of the towering figure, Malay thinker, that thinks that otherwise because of there are certain episodes in Sejarah Melayu and Hikayat Hang Tua, according to him, is actually reflects these kind of values. Yeah, he didn't use the term human rights values, but we can interpret it as human rights values. But what I'm talking about is actually the oral literature. Yeah, this oral literature obviously they're not belong to this educated Malay, people associate to this feudalistic nature of it, or this court literature, the palace, for instance. But these people, these ordinary people, orang laut, for example, during that time, they use pantun, they use syair in order to criticize. For example, we can see syair Tedung, Raja Tedung dan Kata. It's a whole long syair that criticize the king, Johor Riau king, during a ruler at that time, that they engage, they have this political MOU with these Bugis, and according to them, according to the Syair writer, this actually reflect the situation during the Johor Riau within the 17th century. So we have all these sorts of oral literature, pantun, syair, even riddles, teka-teki, that actually, and folklores, that actually tries to imply these human rights values, including freedom of expression. So how do we know it? Well, I need to have a long lecture for this, using semantic inquisitive, for example, to determine whether this pantun really actually sending message on freedom of expression or democracy or etc. etc. But within this limited time frame, I cannot do it. But perhaps I've been writing consistently in my columns, and in fact it's already been collected as anthology of my essays. One of it been banned, but also Sastra Adalah Makanan Anjing still viable, published by Gerak Budaya. Actually, I did mention here and there about this topic. Yeah.
Okay. Jane, I'm not sure if if Siti Aisha has a response to that, as to Dr. Faisal's response. Is your question answered to the level of satisfaction that you were hoping for? Because I think that it can be interpreted very. I mean, is it a reflection of the adat practiced in the community, or a rejection criticism? It is, very much about interpretations and the knowledge that you have of the community at the time, and the whole sort of. I think it's also, Faisal, it's about historical method, right? It's not possible to backdate, as it were, something of freedom of expression. You're going to find freedom of expression expressed from a 1948 document necessarily in the same way in the 17th century. You're going to find, you have to historicize the idea of it, right?
Of course it's not the same, but because we have this notion, this perception that human rights are Western, it's like denying that within Malay society, the traditional Malay society, there's, for example, there's no human rights. In fact, if we look at the very first inscription, old Malay inscription, Talang Tuo, for example, there's tons of human rights values, even food rights in Talang Tuo. And Sriwijaya Narasa, the first king of Sriwijaya, for example, has declared that even human beings and birds, Marga Satwa, are actually equal, to have to share foods and to share equal resources. But of course, we don't know what really happened during Sriwijaya Nasa's era, because we don't have enough documents as evidence other than I Ching's travel documents. But at least we know that this notion of human rights, in a way, in Malay traditional society, still it exists, just like the Cyrus cylinder within the Persian society. It exists. So we cannot deny that this is actually a Western thing, these human rights. Yeah, only that we use different terms. Yeah, if we look at certain classical texts, for example, Kitab Pengetahuan Bahasa Raja Ali Haji, and then those idioms collected by the Orientalist William Marsden, R.J. Wilkinson, for example, and the explanation for all these idioms and proverbs, it's quite extraordinary actually, because the Malay society are aware about racism, for example, for this peribahasa on orang hitam and merdeka or merdeka, freedom, it's obviously referring to orang hitam, means that people are aware about racism in a way what we have right now. So and this is back in 17th century and 18th century. So yeah, I mean, I can speak quite a very long on this matter, and in fact I've written a few academic papers and it's available online, academia.com. So yeah, you can look for it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Faisal. I am going to move to our part 2, and this is where we will hear from Joe. Joe Kukutas. There's really no, I mean, really, yes. Okay, shall we go through the process of introducing you, Joe? Joe Kukutas is a writer, performer, director, and artistic director of the Instant Cafe Theatre Company. And Joe's actually, well, apart from all the artistic and cultural work that she's done, she specifically is also a Asian public intellectual fellow and a DDS fellow, De La Salle Democracy Discourse, and of course she's very close to YB, the fictional Deputy Minister of Moral Panic. Joe, you're going to tell us about everybody's business and new audiences as far as Instant Cafe Theatre Company is. Can you let us know what your thoughts are?
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, it's really interesting listening to everybody. You know, I think we're quite champion at othering other people, which is why forums like this are so important. And it's really interesting hearing all the kind of theoretical, philosophical, and even theological readings of freedom of expression. So I'm going to be a bit more simple, I think. I'm going to ask a quite simple question of myself. I think when I looked at the title of this forum about the idea of whose freedom are we allowed to defend? So we say we have freedom of expression, but whose freedom do we think we are allowed to defend on a personal and community level? Are we allowed to defend people outside our race, outside our gender, outside our religion, outside our class? Are we allowed to mock? Are we allowed to laugh? Are we allowed to defend liberals? I mean, like Adli said the other day, or will you be questioned like he was as to why we are defending progressive values or pluralism? What exactly is this thing called budaya kita? Who are we when we say kita in budaya kita? And is that kita the same as when we say kita jaga kita? So what is kita? I kind of want to ask this question. About my own work, you know, over the years, people have asked me why I've done plays about things which are, as people have said, none of my business. So they've asked me about why I've done plays like Nadira by, okay, how do I minimize this? Oops, hold on. I need to minimize my screen, otherwise I cannot, okay, never mind. They've asked me why I've done plays like Nadira, which is about Islam and religious conversion. You're not Malay, I was told, you're not Muslim. Why is this any of my business? I've done plays like Aircon, and I've been asked, well, why are you doing a play like Aircon? You're not gay, you're not transgender, you're not Muslim. And one particular Malay critic who saw Nadira went so far as to tell me that he felt ashamed that I was directing a play that highlighted how a Chinese convert to Islam falls through the cracks because her husband wants to divorce her. And he told me, I feel ashamed because I wonder why a non-Muslim like yourself is directing a play like this. He asked, why aren't Malay Muslim theatre makers making work like this? He thanked me for directing the work, but he said it troubled him. But his statement actually troubled me. So this idea of it's none of your business, you know, and the thing is, if you're told that something is none of your business, often enough, you come to believe it. And I wonder how much we've come to believe this is not our business. We have no right to express our care, our concern over things which are not supposed to be in our interest, like religious conversion. And this makes people stop getting involved, which is why a case like Indira Gandhi and the abduction of her child by her ex-husband can drag on for so many years. There isn't enough public sympathy. There are no films, there's no TV dramas about her 10-year battle for justice. There aren't street protests. Nobody seems to want to exercise their freedom of expression there because not getting involved in other people's business has been normalized. In fact, it's seen as the right way to behave. So I want to know, well, why has this become the norm? And maybe when we have a race and religion-based party system, we end up having a race and religion-based system of thinking, and therefore of caring as well. We become communal, we become polarized. I'm not saying this is unique to Malaysia. I have a very good friend of mine in Indonesia, a theatre maker called Dindon, who told me that every Ramadan, he always helps the non-Muslims in his community. And he used to get a lot of flack for this. And he was told that during Ramadan, he ought to help his fellow Muslims. But his answer was, I believe that during Ramadan, you should help just those who I need. And there are all these stories which highlight how someone from outside a community caring for someone else in a different community, these sorts of stories you see sometimes on things like BuzzFeed, BuzzFeed type stories in Malaysia. Oh, a Chinese family was stranded on a highway, a Malay family came to their assistance, how wonderful. But I asked myself, is this wonderful? Because is thinking this wonderful might point to a deep-seated problem we have, that we think it's not normal. It's not human just to want to help somebody else. I often get asked, why are you telling stories about refugees? You're not a refugee. And then I get told, oh, you care more for refugees than you do for your own fellow Malaysians. And this idea that the idea of freedom of expression only being for Malaysians is also, I think, something which I find quite unsettling. So you may wonder, well, why am I telling these stories in a forum about freedom of expression? And I think it's because the question of whose freedom is what's important, for me at least today. Because I think it's not that we don't have freedom of expression, but maybe we're a bit afraid to exercise it except in safe places or behind closed doors. Because maybe we've normalized to believe that we can only say and think certain things in private, but not in public. So for example, if you're in the LGBTQ community, you can be gay, LGBTQ, as long as it's private. So no public parades of who you are. So we have not normalized the idea of publicly allowing differences, because differences are messy, they're complicated. And I don't talk about things like this forum. I'm talking outside forums that we try to engage in. I'm talking about the general public. But I also think that things become very complicated when we don't normalize expressing our views openly for fear of repercussions. We murmur, but will we speak up? And if we don't speak up, will we go from a case of freedom of expression to a case of injustice, as in the case of Indira Gandhi? Will we speak openly of such cases, or will we let them fester? And what happens to a society when we let things fester? We just spend our time whispering. We become a country of whisperers, and when we don't release our angin, then we become sick. So to people who ask, why do you make theatre about other people's business? I want to say, I want and I need to tell other people's stories as much as I want to tell my own. I want to normalize getting involved in issues which are not any of my business. So that's why I'm very heartened whenever I see new expressions of freedom that go beyond communal self-interest. Of course, there's always a degree of self-interest. I'm interested in a more open, plural, tolerant society. This is why I believe in laughter. If we can laugh, we can be tolerant. As far back as Lut, this is something that we all understood very well. We can be lighter and less polarized. But above all, I believe in stories. I want people to share their stories because I believe that sharing our stories creates empathy. And I believe empathy is important in a multicultural democracy. For instance, Cafe, the pandemic forced us into the digital world. And we quickly found we could take our stories and conversations to a very different audience. And this taught us a great deal. And I felt this way, this new paradigm that we found was our relationship became more equal. When we did our digital plays, it broadened the space for conversation, for empathy, for understanding. And I think with telling stories, it's harder to other people when you share your stories with them. So another new thing, I guess, that we are doing is we're also coming out with a new series of webcomics, which hopefully will make people laugh, but also think and also feel. I think telling our own stories is very important. It's a very powerful way of letting people know who you are and what you feel and what you believe. It creates empathy. But I think telling the stories of other people, people very different from ourselves, is a very powerful way of saying we are listening. And right now, I think what we need to do is we need to find new ways of listening.
Okay, thank you, Jo. I think there's another debate around also, you know, in terms of which you have mentioned, the extent to which the space must be made or the space is taken for other narratives to be represented, other than sort of speaking on behalf of. I think, for example, in theatre, casting even different ethnic types against, you know, what the character is, and that is always going to be, I think, or at least for now, a problematic kind of venture. And I think the dialogue has got to happen around the choices around that to be not kind of well-meaning and intending. I'd like now to go to our last speaker, but thank you for waiting, Jason. Jason Wee is the co-founder of Architects of Diversity Malaysia. It's a non-profit that aims to bridge communities and identity groups among youth for justice, peace, and a sustainable future. He is a graduate of the School of Public and International, with a focus on race, ethnicity, and discrimination at Princeton University. And he does represent the youngest person. That's why we chose to, thank you for waiting, Jason, to tell us more about the kinds of projects that you've been doing in relation to freedom of expression among younger communities.
Great, thanks, Anne. And I think, you know, I kind of want to be responsive with what everyone else has been saying as well. And I very much want to extend, you know, the question that Joe asked, which is, how do we get here? How do we learn all these things, right? And I think to answer that question, we do look at youth. And in my position as AOD, we work very closely with young Malaysians and children of various ages. And I think for this, you know, the 5 minutes I have, I kind of want to ask 2 questions, and through it, I'll kind of guide my work inside. The first thing is, you know, how are we socialized into silencing ourselves? With the youth I work with, where we have activities and we talk about Bumi Putra rights, we talk about religious identity, we talk about sexuality. The hardest part of having these conversations is not about containing the space where they might actually accidentally offend someone, because we're very familiar and actually quite okay with that. But actually the hardest part is to get our youth comfortable with speaking about these things, that the effects of our laws have chilled so far down that our children's curiosity has been stymied. Why do I think this happens? They fear conflict and being disagreeable, which a lot of our freedom of expression is inhibited because of that. But I think more so they fear punishment from authorities. Because we're not born, you know, with these 2 fears, rather we're socialized to family, and even more importantly, I think it's through school, where our authorities in schools, where the default becomes no, when teachers say no, when friends say no, those things create an atmosphere and kind of norm us into kind of inhibiting our own expression of different kinds of speech that would kind of stop us from having more productive conversations. When one person gets punished in these spaces, it chills and norms speech and expression, where even when someone doesn't do anything, I think that environment is really growing in our schools for the longest time, which has really translated the kinds of legislature that the state has instrumented within our society. So I think with the second question then becomes, how do we create spaces for youth to challenge and practice this kind of muscle to reestablish this norm for openness? Because I think that's kind of the question at hand. So we have kind of the theory behind it. We do have an impetus for it, but how do we make it reality? I think the first thing is that we can, I think, possibly sleep a bit better that, in my opinion, that many are doing it organically on social media. I think, you know, I'm very young myself, but even among the youth I interact with, the level of expression and openness that's practiced on social media where it's ungoverned it breaks territories and challenges norms that previously existed. Albeit that there are language differences between BM, English, and Mandarin dimensions of social media, I would say that many youth are already doing this, and we must prevent that space from being curbed or being limited. But I think the more important thing is about how do we create spaces external to normal life that can rearrange the construct of realities to kind of distort and unlearn and relearn norms for freedom of expression, right? In AOD, we have this one activity where we provide fake ICs to our participants where they receive an identity that's diametrically opposed to their own. So if you were a Chinese boy from urban Selangor, you would probably get, for example, a lower class female from Kelantan, for example. And what this does is really, it successfully forces a conflict in their own shoes, where they have to step into someone else's shoes and imagine how they might feel like both giving and receiving speech. But I think the more important part is it opens up a space where for youth, we need to temporarily suspend their attachment to identities and norms. Because if we want to talk about attacking the mainstream norms directly, that's going to be incredibly difficult with the amount of actors and institutions that have been crystallizing for decades upon decades. So I think for the impetus for any actor in this space, it must be to create a flurry of spaces that can be enough where we're creating enough spaces to reclaim mainstream spaces through ripples, where I guess we want to make spaces where others can, I guess, find the pleasure of adventure or otherness, right? Of restricted domains, but at the same time with grace and sensitivity that Dr. Helen very much talked about, like empathy. So even for practitioners that are currently, all out there, I think the question for us is that we must make sure that we're not just teaching students and the youth that they have the freedom, but make sure that that muscle is practiced consistently.
Great, thank you, Jason. Can I just ask you a little bit more? When you say youth, what age groups are you talking about? What class, what gender, what sort of, can you give more
So
detail?
we usually work with around 15 to 21 on average of multiple backgrounds from different states.
And you're in every state in the country, or how does it?
Just like Joe mentioned, the COVID pandemic, where everything's moved online, has really provided a more equal platform for participation. When it was physical, we flew in participants, but now we have such important access to multiple people, albeit there are internet restrictions, but it has really democratized the space of participation that I think has brought about an opportunity that none of us might have seen, a year ago. Okay,
great. Well, thank you, Jason. So that's it for all of us speakers in terms of the notes and comments prepared. We have now a good section of time for conversation and questions from the floor. And I encourage speakers to also please just add your 10 cents about this. Don't necessarily wait for me. But there is a specific question here from Saleh. What is the role of the media for freedom in Malaysia? Can't civil society in Malaysia play a better role in freedom? What is the role of the media for freedom in Malaysia? The questions can be taken separately or together. And there's also a third one, which is, I think freedom is still on the sidelines. What is the solution that made the freedom discourse a public issue? So let's go with I don't know. Of those three, does anyone want to take a stab at any of them? Is freedom still on the sidelines? What is the solution to make freedom discourse a public issue? Well, it seems to me that work that is being done on the ground is happening, but to kind of reach beyond these small coteries, I suppose, is where this is coming from. Academia, at least in higher education, is still a very sort of narrow group.
I might jump in.
Yep.
With something. The idea of freedom being on the sidelines, right? And I think I mentioned this the other day when I said that I think that surprises me whenever I, do kind of engagements with students, university students mostly. And the thing that always surprises me is that they often ask me, when do you think we'll have freedom of expression in Malaysia? Do you think we'll ever have freedom of expression? And when I say to them, well, theoretically we do, in the constitution it's guaranteed. And I think today, listening to the first three speakers, hearing also the kind of as I said, the theological, philosophical underpinnings of it, it all exists. And yet I think, Saleh, you're right when you say it's on the sidelines, because many people don't believe it. So how do we then make it into a public discourse? I mean, this is in some ways a public discourse, but it's still, a necessary discourse. But what will make it a BTS type discourse? What's going to make it big? How do we make it something which people will walk on the streets for? In the way that they did for Bersih and things like this. So I think it is. I do wonder why, and I think Jason, you've had experience with this as well. Why the kids that you meet don't want to take it on, and I think you've given some answers for that as well. But maybe that's just my first sort of like foray into this question, if anybody wants to sort of jump in.
Yep, I may add to that as well. I mean, I guess that's where government comes in, the institution, I mean, they are focusing too much on managing the freedom of expression. But what they should do is actually facilitating this expression. Because what they're trying to do is whenever there's voices, they will try to clamp it down. They have to shut it down whenever people are asking questions. I remember there's even recently when someone actually tweeted with a question mark about what happened in Kedah, and he the MB of Kedah lodged a police report, and suddenly there's a case against him. I mean, that is the level of management or control that we are facing now, and it's really unfortunate. So for us, like what you said, Jason, I mean, you are rightly said so. I mean, the way how we see it, unfortunately, pragmatically speaking, it's not as, even though how beautiful the theory is, it's not as easy of implementing on the ground. I mean, again, as you know, I mean, just we've been working together as well. Unfortunately, we have to create these small pockets of spaces, making sure that people are getting more comfortable, making sure that it's okay. Yes, we are not yet at the level of everyone, can see whatever they want, but at least at this point, what we're trying to do as NGO, and of course, as compared to media that has more power, as NGO, we're trying to do what we do best. And as Habib, we are a grassroots organization. We're just making sure that our grassroots members, about 15,000 of them on the ground, making sure that they will always continue to expand, because we don't want the conversation like what we have now in social media. It's more like an urban centric. What we're trying to do now with our constant meeting with our grassroots leaders and others, we are making sure that there is sets of questions, sets of tools, activities that you can actually do it with your community. So this conversation is going on. And what we're trying to do is to create that safe space and also to build this trust, because now there's this high level of trust deficit on everything. I mean, not just about the government, NGO, or even corporates. I mean, as you know, there's this double standard of implementation of laws, but of course, there's this trust against the system, about democratic system, because they see how it was being manipulated by 220 MPs. And this is why we're making sure that the idea what we're trying to do in Project Bangsa Malaysia is to take charge of it, making sure that they feel empowered by being Bangsa Malaysia is us. Kita tu is Bangsa Malaysia, you and me, and not them as in the politicians 220. But us is actually making sure that we know and we trust each other. So whatever that happens up there should not determine what is our feeling. We have our own feelings. We should not let our voices be hijacked by politicians on the idea of Bangsa Malaysia, democracy, politics, and freedom of expression. So I guess it's a long way, but again, Abim, as you can see, it's 50 years of Abim. What we're trying to do is generational struggle, and what we're trying to do work for is not to see. I mean, we want to see change tomorrow and now, if it's possible, but it's not possible. So I guess what we can do is continue doing, engaging, talking, making sure that our next generation could actually continue pushing this, and of course, until one day that we can see an ideal state that we want to see.
Yeah, maybe I just jump in. I think that very often when we think of freedom of expression, we sort of look at the government and say, they are limiting our freedom of expression. But sometimes maybe we need to also look at us and among us, because it is a culture. When other people are expressing views which is very different from us, how do we see it? How do we take it? Maybe sometimes we disagree strongly with the views. We can perhaps stop and think also whether it's legitimate views. Of course, sometimes there are views which they purposely, such as, Antli talk about hate speech and so on. There is no place for such a thing. But sometimes there are genuine differences in terms of views. And there, I think maybe all of us need to learn how to sort of also listen to different point of view, because this era that is different from others is that we have this social media whereby people are just free to express themselves, and sometimes, you know, with sort of extremes too. It is an issue of how we manage this. So what I mean is, even the government, even though they try to control, I do not think that they succeed totally. They can succeed to a certain extent, but not all. But the limit actually is within our culture. Are we tolerant of differences in terms of, you know, if others express views different from ours? And do we listen enough? Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, Salih's point around, you're asking, you know, about media is where is it gone? It's gone a little bit further up. What is the role of the media for freedom in Malaysia? I think that media there needs to be a little unpacked a bit, right? I mean, social media, or is this sort of more the conventional print media, or at least what used to go past for print media? Because I think that social media and, you know, for example, Twitter, I think that is a very different environment. Would we say that there is a lack of freedom of expression in Twitter compared with the sort of conventional, traditional media of the old pack, you know, media prima, where you are on, because of the huge pivot that's happened onto online. Therefore, it's you know, is it actually true to say that the freedom of expression on social media is much more guarded, or, as I think you mentioned, that no, on the contrary, it is a lot. The government can only kind of, you know, if it wants to pick a Fahmi Reza, for example, he is producing an image every day, and they can only take, like almost arbitrarily, take something and point it out as being something that he then has to, you know, go and visit the Balai Polis. So what is the role of the media for freedom in Malaysia? Can't civil society in Malaysia play a better role? I think this is talking about becoming more mainstream, right? This is changing the culture. And I think, Dr. Ting, you're talking about how actually even without government points of view, we have a lot of, for example, gender-based violence on social media. If, you know, I can think of a person who is transgender person, for example, is, you know, how they are attacked on social media. There's a lot of freedom of expression around that kind of area. But in relation to sort of this kind of, I don't know, puristic notion, being able to say what you like about the government, is that in fact the kind of freedom of expression that is being referred to here?
Yeah, I guess there is an issue of power relations there. If it is a dominant culture, or, you know, dominant discourse, then they get their way. Whereas if you know, it is less dominant discourse or groups, they may get victimized in this this environment.
Yes. Okay.
So it's not in various institutions as well, though, Anne. I mean, we have to ask whether or not our institution of the media, I mean, meaning the press, right? How much freedom do they have? I mean, they're very curtailed with a lot of different kind of laws, Official Secrets Act, Official Printing Press Act. I mean, I don't know which ones apply to things which are online portals, for example. But, you know, you compare the press freedom here compared to, for example, not press freedom, but the taking of freedom. The taking of freedom, which I think is an important difference between having freedom and taking of it. So, you know, recently there was that discourse that was done by Malaysia Kini, where they invited Maria Ressas who was then awarded the Nobel Prize. It was such a lovely moment. But the dialogue she was part of was looking at the future of journalism in Southeast Asia, and a worrying state of journalism in Southeast Asia. And of course, in the Philippines, the political system is far more terrifying, really, than it is here, right, with the DDS and all the rest of it. And yet it's met with a certain level of bravery, which I don't think we have here, but maybe because we haven't had such a demonic kind of power on the other side, that we have also been kind of more, about it. So I think for me, it's also about how much we want to take this freedom and how much we want to use it, and how brave we want to be. And I think it comes back to this question of why is there so much fear? For me, this is an important question, and what can we do about the fear that people have to express, even in private groups or in a bigger sphere, the things which they are thinking and feeling.
I mean, just to hop in as well, I think to contextualize this question in the past few months, where just a few months ago, I saw my friends being whisked away on kind of Black Marias, right, after they hosted the vigil. Of course, it's scary sometimes, where I think we need to contextualize this fear in the sense that where our enforcement is erratic. And it's less so, I think, where you can prepare for the fear and when you cannot prepare for the fear. And that really is the kind of friction that you produce when, no one got arrested on the 31st of July, but then a few weeks later, you would get arrested. I think really the point here I want to make is that there are challenges to it, and there is a growing democratization of the space, which I kind of want to warn us from kind of making generalized statements sometimes about what the current trend is, because sometimes we just don't know. And I think it's that exact ignorance sometimes that is called pluralistic ignorance in the psychological sense, when we think other people are scared too, and so that enhances our fear. But in matter of fact is we really cannot have a good sense of that. And obviously the state knows this and has instruments to prevent us from knowing. So I think rather than, saying that fear, it's just it of itself a problem, I think the question is then, how do you build inroads to, even though you have that fear, how do you create the support networks otherwise? Because I think while generations before mine have, like for example in Bersih, have created those networks that have very much preceded the kinds of structures that were needed to have the Black Flag protest. But how do you keep on building those structures to support people, to make sure that we are going out in the streets? Because I think Tom Popinski wrote on this once, that authoritarianism, especially in Southeast Asia, is not exciting. It's very mundane. It's you live your daily life, go shop, you worry about putting food on the table. But overall, if you keep in your lane, you do fine. And that's really the perverse incentive structure that's created, that has instilled and disincentivized the fear. So it's about recreating that incentive structure that by supplanting more and more support, which is just including more people in the circle. It's a very slow process. I've only been in this space for a bit more than a year. It's impressive, I think, to see the people that have been operating in the civil space. I don't want to diminish their work, but there's just so much more resources that's needed. Just because we're in this weird middle ground where we're not too bad, but we're not too good either.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jason. I'm just going to move now to Alang Ahmad's question. He asks, could Faisal Tehrani please comment on freedom of speech, inverted commas, in public universities, and whether there is a culture of academic integrity and honesty among the academics? And Helen, I see you smiling. Maybe you can add your thoughts also after Faisal. Please comment on freedom of speech in public universities, and whether there is a culture of academic integrity and honesty among academics.
Well,
public universities.
This is quite a difficult question, because I ought to give a very long answer, and I just don't have time to do that. you know. But I do think that's the environment created nowadays within the public universities, discourage perhaps this kind of freedom for the academics, in a way that the academics think of how to get themselves promoted first, because of this environment of championing to write quantity, numbers of papers, index papers in journals, Scopus, ISI, ERA, whatsoever, and for this reason, there's a lot of manipulation of data, manipulation of students, many other things. Yeah. So I've been writing about this in my columns quite a few times, and how these lecturers or academics using journals on fake journals, for example, and other stuff. Yeah, but because of this, I think that this culture, this environment of seeking this to be recognized as a professor, this has created a kind of toxic culture, because the academics, at least, they choose what are the topics, safe topics that they can elaborate, that they want to write, that they want to discuss about. And because of this kind of system, toxic system that have been applied and implemented within our society in Malaysia. So it's not really about whether there are freedom of speech or not, because obviously, if you can see that I've been writing a lot of stuff, sensitive stuff. I have 7 books banned. I have most of my academic works touch upon human rights, minorities' rights, and others. So I must say that there are sort of like a freedom, but the academics choose not to do it because this environment or culture created them to chase, to hunt the position. Yeah, because it's like the academics are trained no longer trained as educationists or thinkers. I mean, the ideals of Syed Hussein Alatas when he talks about intelligentsia, for example. So there's nothing like this anymore. So yeah, so it's not about, I think, freedom, because I think as an academic, there's a lot of way to navigate this. I mean, perhaps Dr. Helen can explain a lot more. But I think because of the environment, this system, what we have nowadays. Perhaps Dr. Helen can add a little more. Perhaps I have different perspective.
Okay. I think when you ask whether there is freedom of speech in public universities, it sounds as if in the private university you have more freedom of speech. Is that really the case? I want to ask you, Alan Ahmad. But I feel that we cannot generalize. As Dr. Faisal say, actually, it's probably like what we said just now. We have this freedom, but how much do we take this freedom and use it? I just want to share. I mean, I'm only in the university for about slightly more than 10 years, but I saw a sea change in the university culture. Before, I remember when I first entered, the culture was trying to encourage more publication, because there is this ministry who tried to set this KPI to make us research university. So there was this encouragement about lecturers publishing. Whereas before, lecturers can just go on teaching courses, and they can get by, but they are not used to doing research or creating new knowledge, just passing on knowledge. So over the year, it has changed because more and more, I think the ministry is emphasizing on this KPI of world ranking. And you see that, UM is sort of on top and the others are trying to chase this ranking. And this is where what Dr. Faisal said about chasing paper, number of publication and so on come in. In a way, I feel mixed about it, in the sense that before, it's true, lecturers are not even sort of evaluated based on, their KPIs may be just teaching, whereas later on, they are sort of given incentive to at least do research and publish. But at the same time, now it seems to be going more and more to another end. Our university just set the rule that postgraduate students need to publish with their supervisor to be graduated, whereas before it is up to each faculty or institute to set that condition. And I thought this is not right, because if the students can publish, why do they have to publish with supervisor in order to graduate? But when I start to check with my colleague in UM, she told me, we have implemented this long time ago. So what I mean is, maybe you see UM as, at the top, very good, but the reality on the ground is much more complex than that in terms of, academic freedom and integrity and so on. But as Dr. Faisal say, it is the environment, the environment which I'm not sure whether we publish more means we are academically better. We should be able to create new knowledge, which, one channel is to publish them so that, they are known. But at the same time, does quantity equals to quality? And does ISI, the so-called Web of Science publication, equals to, quality per se? Nowadays, when I ask the students, what type of publication is, sort of provide academic sort of credential, or, it shows the quality of academic research, they will tell me it's journal. But long time ago, it was not journal, it was books.
Helen,
yeah,
can I interrupt you and say, like with the shift, the shift to sort of KPIs and produce more work, this is something that is kind of, in a way, across, this is a global phenomenon, right? This is not specific to Malaysia.
Yes.
And but are you saying that the shift that's happening in UKM is around the sea change that you refer to, is that there is actually a better kind of quality coming through as a result of
anyway, I have seen also issues with foreign systems with a similar problem. I think it is actually we are led by so-called capitalists who buy up all the top sort of established journals, and then they are going to sort of all collect them in one collection and get universities to pay for the subscription to access them. And the fees to access these journal articles is so ridiculous. I resist this, okay? But we are in a system, in a world system even. Anyway, this, I don't know whether, I do think it has something to do with our freedom of expression, because it's controlling how academics are producing knowledge and how they are sort of, being, how to say, graded. Yeah, now if you don't produce in journals, if you are only, let's say, writing in as a book chapter, even if it is a good university academic press, you can be nothing because they are using a different criteria to judge you as an academic. Okay.
Understand.
Yeah.
Understand.
Okay.
Thank you. I wonder if I can open up. I mean, we're coming into our last 5 minutes here, but I wonder if I can just open it up really and say that, you know, I think a strategy is that, you know, we have had since, you know, main narrative is that since, you know, 1969, the whole raft of laws that came into place after the riots to justify, you know, so all of these, there are large, that 10 or 12 laws that came in through that time. Is it your opinion that if we get rid of the laws, if the advocacy is around removing these laws, that how much would this change things? I mean, you know, I don't mean it in a simple sense, but how would this in what you're doing as well? This is open for everyone, you know, in terms of your last.
I should give the floor to others.
No, sorry. I just, you know, it's the magic button tomorrow is okay. All of these laws will be repealed, and is that going to be? Is that?
I think it will take decades probably to rebuild academic culture, a vibrant academic culture which values knowledge, real knowledge, true knowledge, rather than just quantity of articles being produced, because the culture, you cannot, you know, create it in 1 year. It takes time.
I just think that also you can remove those laws, but removing things from people's psyche takes much longer. Right. And I think just listening to what Jason was saying earlier about, you know, when his friends were recently arrested, held overnight, or, you know, and how he felt at that point. And I was listening to that and thinking about, you know, times in the past when this has happened, right? And Jason, I think you asked a very important question about this, because I think sometimes what we don't have, and I think Edin Khoo always says that we lack institutional memory, you know. So I think the documentation of these things is really important, because documenting what's happened in the past also is a way to make people sort of know how to deal with the present. Right. And I know when I was a kind of young, you know, go out in the streets and, you know, Reformatsi days and all the rest of it, you know, trying to find out kind of the previous history of it was quite hard. I mean, of course, I had my father and people like this, right? The old lefties were all there. You could talk to them. But I think in order for us to move forward, it can't just be the removing of the law, though that'll be a great start. And if you could work on that, that'll be great. But how can we get rid of this really, what appears to be quite an embedded amnesia, you know, about previous battles half won, you know, so we're not always reinventing the wheel.
Adli, can I ask you, and, you know, in terms of when you're talking about Bangsa Malaysia in the project, how much sort of historical reference do you include within the work that you do?
I would say, be honest, I mean, there's not much actually looking at our history, where we're coming from, but it's more, the focus is understanding where we're coming from, knowing where we are, and looking at the direction that we're going to. And we are much focusing on the direction that we're going to, like I said, because if you start on the history, there'll be different voices of opinions and others about history. And of course, it's important, yes, to have that conversation. But in our project, it's focusing on the direction. So it is part of the healing process, if I might say, all these thorns. And I recall this book, I mean, this by William Davis, and it's with me, called Never States. So it's here. So William said that the essence of trauma is not pain, but the acute disempowerment. So what we are facing now, all of us are suffering pain from this empowerment. So what we're trying to do now is empowering them, making sure that they have this confidence of voicing out their concern. I mean, I just would like to respond on your question. So on the laws, it definitely not things that could change overnight, even after the repeal of law, but definitely a good catalyst. I mean, will basically change a lot of things. I remember when the previous election, I mean, the election, when there's a change of government, you can see a quick trend of change of progressiveness in the public. I mean, of course, things get noisy. I mean, everyone's talking about it, everyone's expressing their opinion, which shows that a big change from the part of the political sphere, whether it's administrative or even law, will definitely produce something that is good for the public. And of course, it's how you can actually maintain it. And I would like to respond again. I remember in 2015, if I'm not, there is this Index Keharmonian by Jabatan Perpaduan Nasional Japanin, which is now a kementerian. And this index keharmonian actually value harmony by looking at the numbers, how many kind of like vigil occurred in a year, how many protests in a year, which shows that from the government perspective, all this actually disrupts harmony, and of course we should be dampened. And I guess that's where the ideas are coming, all these laws, trying to manage this freedom of expression, but they actually should facilitate, because like I said, freedom of expression is part of the human dignity, it's part of the human nature, they will continue to express. So in order to balance the idea of harmony and the expression of the people, is actually to facilitate it, making sure that everyone is comfortable enough to have this conversation, either openly or secretly. I mean, so the government should not, should not paying too much attention on all this issue, because this is not the threat. The threat is actually the 1.8 billions of money in outside of Malaysia. That is the real threat. I'm talking about Pandora Papers. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Just Faisal or Jason, you want to respond?
I think if we remove all the laws, still we need to have, we need to change our mindset. I mean, the problem is our mindset. I mean, like, we don't really question. I mean, like, for example, the Pandora Papers, for example, yeah, people are more interested and attracted to whether Era Fazira get married to Faza Azumu, for example, yeah. So, and other stuff, say sensational stuff. So people, we don't have this quality to in arguments, in debates, and to questions. So maybe because we are feudalistic society, I don't know. I mean, like, but we need to look at this. I mean, to change the mindset, because there's sort of like a famous idiom among artists, among writers, among literary writers, yeah, originated from Seno Gumira Ajudharma words or book title, Kalau Jurnalisme Bungkam Sastra Harus Bicara. But in Malaysian context, kalau jurnalisme bungkam, sastra juga bungkam. So we can't even see that. I mean, like the literary works that are questioning situations, serious situations on poverty, for example, corruption, for example, yeah, many other things. Yeah. So I think although that we just remove all the laws, still things won't be as what we want if we don't change the mindset. I mean, so it's a long way to go, and everybody, civil society, lecturers, academics, artists, need to do a lot of more works, yeah, to educate or to change this mindset. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Jason. You want to quickie get in there,
Yeah.
or because
I mean,
we're over time a bit.
Yeah, I'll follow the kind of the yes but formats. I mean, yes, I won't wake up, fearing I'll get arrested, so that will help me to work a lot. But I think obviously you talk about laws, you talk about psyche, but there's so much in between as well. There's the institutions, that minor rules, school rules, company rules, what is acceptable, and what are norms is very much influenced by the kinds of both written and unwritten rules beyond just state institutions. And those will take time to reflect the change at the federal or state level, and that trickle-down process will take time. But I mean, it's nice to imagine if we can take the law out tomorrow or so.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Yeah, it's nice to imagine. I think from the beginning, we're talking about trying to focus on whose freedoms and also to understand more about what kind of new expressions are occurring, despite there being such a kind of, I think the COVID-19 has had a particular obvious devastating effect, to use the same words, on what options there are in terms of building ground. And yet there have been opportunities, and clearly, the work that all of you are doing, at the very least, I think are reasons to be cheerful in what has been a very troubling time. And I think the sort of systemic kind of change shifts that need to happen I don't know, it's going to be some kind of perfect storm that could change really a mindset that has taken us so long to get to this point, and to have the shift required is going to take a lot. But a revolution, I don't know, something like, I don't know where it's going to come from. Maybe the young that you have been working with, Jason. So I think we've thank you to all the speakers here and sharing the counter narratives or the work that you've been doing with Heart and Soul, both with other like-minded, as well as breaking boundaries where you can, and creating new fields. I want to thank you to speakers. I would like to thank the funders for enabling us to be able to meet here, and thank you to those who've joined us tonight. I think if there are any other questions and want to continue, please get in touch with ICT to continue if there are any questions that you have that you want to have, and continue the dialogue. Otherwise, goodbye from all of us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the forum.
Thanks. Bye. Good evening.